Week 21 Overview. Truman, Korea, and the Red Scare. We're back in America this week with President Harry Truman in office. He's the man who said, "The buck stops here." As the first president to face the Cold War, Truman tried to contain communism, which seemed to be expanding around the world. Last week, we learned about Mao's communist revolution in China. This week, students will be learning about the Korean War, Stalin's Russia, and the Red Scare in America in the 1950s. This was America's second Great Red Scare, and it set in a few years after World War II, from 1947 until about 1954. This period of national hysteria was made memorable by Senator Joseph McCarthy, who accused hundreds of government employees of being communists. McCarthy found a few real communists, but the witch hunt atmosphere that he created also ruined the lives of many men and women who were most likely innocent of the charges that he brought. It wasn't there weren't communists. America was gripped by the sensational trial of spies Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were caught, tried, and sentenced to die as traitors. The Rosenbergs claimed that they were innocent, but the rest of their gang pled guilty of stealing nuclear secrets. Such secret spies for Russia gave credence to the McCarthy hearings. As Americans wrestled with the specter of communism at home, they fought to contain it abroad. American soldiers were paying the ultimate price half a world away in the barren hills of Korea, in what has sometimes been called America's Forgotten War. Younger students will learn fascinating details about Korean culture and the people of the two Koreas this week. Half of this beautiful land has been under communist control since 1950, as North Korea has been closed off from the rest of the world and is one of the poorest nations in Asia. South Korea, by contrast, is a relatively prosperous democracy. Many South Koreans have embraced Christianity and are eager to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with the rest of Asia. In 1949, America learned that the Russians had test detonated an atomic bomb. The U.S. monopoly on nuclear technology was no more. The Cold War led to a nuclear arms race. For the first time, Americans had reason to fear that Soviet bombs might land on American cities. In 1950, a physicist named Klaus Fuchs was convicted of having passed secrets to the Soviets regarding the atomic bomb. Fuchs didn't work alone. An American chemist named Harry Gold and a soldier named David Greenglass were also implicated. But then Greenglass claimed that his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, had also been involved. In the summer of 1950, Julius and his wife Ethel were arrested and stood trial for espionage. The Rosenbergs were a Jewish working-class couple with 2 children. They didn't fit the typical image of a spy. Although the Rosenbergs did have communist sympathies, they pled not guilty to the charge of espionage. Since they would not cooperate, the government sought the severest possible punishment, the death penalty. Joseph McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin who claimed that he had a list of communists in the U.S. State Department. He called a series of long-running congressional investigations of spies in high places. Although McCarthy's investigations often lacked any evidence to support the accusations, the people investigated still suffered harm. Their careers were hurt and their reputations tarnished. People suspected of communist sympathies were blacklisted. This included government officials, prominent professors, influential industrialists, and the like. McCarthy specifically targeted the Hollywood community. Stars, producers, and writers were threatened by his investigations. People who disagreed with McCarthy's tactics described them as a witch hunt. In Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, which rhetoric literature students are reading this week, Miller compares the 17th century witch hunts in Salem, Massachusetts, with McCarthy's investigations. For many Americans, the play revealed McCarthy's investigations for what they were: hysterical accusations with little objective proof that ruined lives and reputations. As McCarthy hunted for the communists, the Rosenberg case worked its way through the courts. The other defendants, who admitted that they were spies, got prison sentences, but the Rosenbergs, who pled innocent, were convicted of espionage and sentenced to death. That divided Americans. Many were glad that traitors were being brought to justice. Many others thought the trial was motivated by anti-Semitism and anti-communist fears. Those who believed the latter thought the Rosenbergs were being framed. Whether they were innocent or guilty, they were parents, and many who thought the Rosenbergs were guilty didn't like the thought their children would be orphaned. The furor didn't stop the courts. The Rosenbergs were executed in 1953. That was a sobering end to one part of the Red Scare. General Dwight Eisenhower helped end another part of it after he won the election of 1952. Ike didn't like McCarthy's methods, and he decided to give McCarthy enough rope to hang himself. He encouraged Congress to form an investigative committee which televised the so-called Army McCarthy hearings. For the first time, Americans were able to see who McCarthy really was, and they were not impressed. On television, he looked like a bully, and a dangerous one. On December 2, 1954, McCarthy was officially censured by the Senate. His political career was ruined. McCarthy secluded himself and took to heavy drinking. He died in 1957. While McCarthy was hunting for communist spies at home, Americans were fighting communist soldiers in Korea. Korea, like Germany, had been divided up at the end of World War II. Korea borders Russia, which occupied the peninsula north of the 38th parallel. The South was administered by the United States and other Western countries. Separate governments for the two Koreas were established in 1948, and Soviet and American troops then withdrew from the divided land. The Communists in North Korea considered invading the South in 1949, but Stalin refused to support them. But after Russia developed nuclear weapons and Mao took over China, Stalin approved a North Korean invasion of the South. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched a surprise invasion, pushing south to the very tip of the peninsula. It was a dramatic test of America's policy of containment. The Truman Doctrine had warned the Soviet Union that the United States would respond with force, if necessary, to any spread of communism that threatened democracy. President Truman responded to North Korea's actions by planning a U invasion to enforce the 38th parallel. Truman assigned General Douglas MacArthur to push the communists back to the border. MacArthur planned and then carried out what is considered the most brilliant amphibious landing in all of military history. MacArthur and his men landed behind the North Korean lines, thus cutting off their supply. With this accomplished, MacArthur's troops drove the invaders not only out of South Korea, but up to North Korea's border with China. MacArthur planned on splitting his forces between the mountain chain that ran down the Korean peninsula, hoping to unite Korea under South Korean leadership. However, he did not expect the Communist Chinese to intervene. On November 26, 1950, however, a huge Chinese army invaded from the north, along with the remaining North Koreans. By January 1st, the UN forces had been pushed back by the massive North Korean Chinese army to the 38th parallel. As intense fighting continued, with the North Korean Chinese army pushing south, negotiations were initiated in March 1951. As MacArthur saw the strength of the North Korean Chinese army, he publicly advocated the idea of attacking and bombing China's bases in Manchuria. Unfortunately, that went against direct orders from both the U.S. and the UN. MacArthur didn't care. He thought the president was wrong, and he said so. The showdown between Truman and MacArthur was dramatic. How hard that must have been for both men. Truman saw the big picture, the Cold War, of which Korea was only a part. MacArthur saw the picture close up, an opportunity to beat the communists and take as much of Asia as possible for the forces of democracy, and possibly avoid another general European war. Both men had good grounds for their analysis and the policy they supported, but only one could be the commander. Truman responded by relieving MacArthur of command for his insubordination. Some consider this Truman's most courageous act as president. Truman took a big risk in dismissing a popular war hero. After almost 3 years of fighting, the U.S. and UN troops finally drove the communists back significantly, and an armistice was drawn up on July 27, 1953. There was no real victory in the Korean War, not even a real end. United Nations troops had driven the communist forces back behind the 38th parallel, but they had not been able to reunite Korea under a democratic government. North and South Korea have never signed a peace agreement and continue to this day divided by a demilitarized zone that is guarded by tens of thousands of soldiers on each side. Almost 30,000 U.S. soldiers are still stationed in Korea to this day. Active fighting ended in Korea, but the Cold War did not. Korea was just one battle and a global conflict between superpowers that dared not confront each other directly. Korea frustrated military leaders like MacArthur and many patriotic Americans who supported him. Many thought America should have it out with Russia once for all, root out the communist menace and destroy it while the West still had the chance. Truman, who had dropped the bomb on Japan, refused to take that risk with Russia. The man who ended World War II refused to start World War III, even if it angered his own citizens. Truman was not very popular when he left office, but over time, most historians have ranked his performance higher and higher, until many see him as one of America's better presidents.